Simply Scuba presents the Deco podcast.
Hi everybody, welcome to the Deco podcast. I'm Mark, a former dive instructor, and this week I'm here to talk about scuba diving and stuff that has piqued my interest over the week as a dive instructor. Jumping straight in with Simply Scuba website updates, there's actually nothing on my list. This is kind of the quiet before the storm, because there is a lot of new stuff that's due to arrive, but because it hasn't specifically been booked in at the time of recording, I don't really like to sort of mention it just in case, because there's a lot of moving parts, and I don't like to overpromise. So yeah, head over to the website. There is some interesting stuff that's due to arrive this weekend, but if it doesn't, then never mind. Moving in swiftly into social channel updates. So this Friday's AskMark, I answered questions on neoprene alternatives, whether they were as warm as regular neoprene, which is always a tricky question because I don't really know, and it's hard to specifically say, yes, this is exactly equivalent to a 3mm or something. So wing buoyancy, which does trip quite a few divers up, sort of when they're first getting into sort of backplate and harness and wings. Which buoyancy, how much buoyancy do I need for my setup, and why would you go for this buoyancy over that if you're perfectly weighted? And wetsuit storage. I was posed an either or question, whether to store a wetsuit rolled up in a dry closet or hanging up properly, but it's in a slightly sort of humid basement. On Saturday, I answered some of Google's questions about fins. Yeah, just basically where I type into the Google search bar something about fins, and it has people also asked, so I just answer those questions. It's a bit of fun. And on Sunday, I did a dive brief about the Fourth Element Scout mask. So I've actually put a little asterisk next to this because as of time of filming, I have filmed this, but I'm kind of hoping to film it again, if that makes sense. Because the Scout mask has 4 different lens options, so you can pick and choose which suits your diving or your environment the best. But I imagine it's going to confuse some people, so I thought, hey, I'd do a dedicated dive brief specifically about the 4 lenses, the mask, and the box it comes in, all that kind of stuff. I planned it all out, and then it got too close to for comfort to be able to film it, edit it, and upload it before Sunday. So I filmed it once, but just using still images, because I'm hoping that my samples are still going to arrive either today or tomorrow. That way I still have enough time to just film it again with some actual video of the actual masks, because that would just make the video so much better if you can actually see it. So I don't know, we'll find out on Sunday which video goes live. And on Tuesday, I did a top tips on cylinders, your diving tanks, and how best to sort of use them, care for them, all that kind of good stuff. So yeah, head over to the YouTube channel for more. In the news, a few stories caught my eye this week. The first one is that more of a quarter of the world's rivers apparently contain potentially toxic levels of over-the-counter and prescription medication drugs, according to a new study. So researchers sampled 258 rivers across the globe, including the London Thames, the Amazon in Brazil, and they've kind of done this before, but only in very select areas. So this is the first time where they've really sort of branched out and did a global study on rivers for a more accurate representation of the entire world. And they were measuring for the presence of 61 specific pharmaceutical drugs. And at just over 25% of the sampling sites, concentrations of at least one substance were greater than concentrations that are considered safe for aquatic organisms. So everything from potentially harmful concentrations of something called propranolol, which is a beta blocker for your heart, sulfur methoxazole, which is an antibiotic for bacterial infection, ciprofloxacin, another antibiotic. Those are the ones that they're quite concerned about, which I'll get into a little bit later, and loratadine, which is an antihistamine. But a lot of 61 different drugs they were looking at, and they're not thinking it's just people dumping like excess drugs down the toilet. They think it's literally the excess of this drug that you're just excreting out, and then when that comes into contact with poorly managed sewage plants adjacent to rivers, these drugs just end up in the water, and it has some quite dangerous sort of onward effects. One of the main researchers, Dr. Wilkinson, said we've known for over 2 decades now that pharmaceuticals make their way into the aquatic environment, where it might affect the biology of living organisms. But one of the largest problems that we faced in tackling this issue is that there hasn't really been a very representative sort of sample when monitoring these contaminants, with almost all of the data focused on just a select few areas in North America, Western Europe, and China. Through the project and knowledge of the global distribution of pharmaceuticals in the aquatic environment, now they have a more representative understanding of, sort of what's going on. Granted, it's just kind of a snapshot, but it gives them some ideas. And unsurprisingly, the most contaminated sites were in low to middle income countries, in areas associated with poor wastewater and waste management infrastructure, and activities most associated with the highest levels of pharmaceutical pollution included rubbish dumping along riverbanks, go figure, inadequate wastewater infrastructure, and pharmaceutical manufacturing, and the dumping of the contents of residual septic tanks into rivers. And these high levels of pharmaceutical pollutions were most positively associated with regions of high median age, as well as high local unemployment and poverty rates. But yeah, the main, yes, this is all sort of interesting and science, but they're really focused on those antibiotics, because the more these antibiotics get put into our like natural waterways, it's actually creating these ultra strong superbugs that everyone's been warning about, and going forwards they're going to be really dangerous, because sure, they might die from a small amount of these antibiotics, but if there ever becomes one bug that doesn't, it can now take that amount of antibiotic and then thrive. So then whenever someone gets sick with that, they throw the usual antibiotics at it, and it just keeps on going. So we do need to be very careful with our antibiotics, and sort of be a bit more just conscious about sort of where it's going and who's prescribed it, and sort of what happens to it even after it passes through our system. It is an interesting study. It's definitely worth sort of looking into it if you're into that kind of mindset. So yeah, I'll pop a link down in the description below. The next news story is a little bit closer to home, or scuba specific, and that is there's a new, it's basically a project in Mexico, in the Yucatan Peninsula, where they're basically planning to run a train line all the way across the cenotes that a lot of cave divers explore and enjoy. So this is a $9.8 billion project that aims to transport 40,000 passengers a day into the Yucatan Peninsula, and it's basically to ferry people from Cancun Airport and then just run 1,500 kilometers south. It's all supposed to sort of move tourism to remote areas of the Yucatan and create jobs. However, unless it's properly planned, which a lot of people don't believe it is, the construction is basically going to cause permanent damage to the environment. Mayan villages that is basically crossing straight through archaeological sites, and it's just going straight over the cenotes, which is relatively sort of delicate anyway, and a train line running across that multiple times a day is the last thing that we need. So the actual train route that it's been planned to go has already changed several times after construction had already started. It was supposed to run along a highway, but because of the construction, it caused like huge traffic delays. So they basically said, "Oh, you know what? No, we're not going to go this route. We're going to go down this way." But they just left all of everything that they've already dug up. They just left it there, and the surrounding lands just is a bit of a mess. So they've caused the mess and then just decided to reroute the train line in another direction. But now the plan is to for the train to run 4 kilometers from the road straight through the middle of the jungle, which is of course going to destroy that habitat where a few endangered and even protected species, including jaguars, monkeys, wild boars and deer live. The geology, the sort of bedrock of this area is limestone. And of course, these flooded caves are underneath, so quite delicate areas. So a lot of digging up and then running a train across it daily is just going to cause chaos. So the one of the things is that they're so focused on trying to finish this train project by the end of 2023. Studies to determine how the construction is going to affect the area have been rushed and just not done thoroughly. So a lot of people are up in arms, especially the cave diving community out there and around the world. So there is a petition to sign. I'll link it down below. There's actually quite a few, which is quite a nice thing, I guess. But yeah, multiple petitions that you can sort of sign at your leisure, just to sort of let the Mexican government know, yeah, you know what, let's try and slow this down, do it properly, and probably not build it over our cave systems. In the last week of July this year, the Sharks Trust are planning a special event called the Global Great Shark Snapshot to try and take part in a community science project to help gather vital information about global shark distribution. So in the final week of July, so that's the 24th to the 31st of July 2022, they're asking for any scuba diving centres, dive clubs, dive boats, and just individual scuba divers to join them in recording as many shark, ray, and skate sightings around the world as possible in that week. They're all going to sort of come together, go scuba diving, record all of the sharks that they see in this snapshot event, that one specific week. And over time, each snapshot will help to build a clearer picture for shark scientists and conservationists. A picture of the species distribution around the world and any population changes. So yeah, they basically ask that you sort of register your dive center, your club, your boat, yourself. I'll put links down in the sort of description below. And then during that week, go out, and if you see any sharks, any rays, any skates, take a photo of them, record their location, and then you'll sort of upload it to their server, as it were. And then that will just be a helpful snapshot to basically see where certain species are, what condition they're in, what conditions the water is in. So yeah, if you're interested and you dive somewhere locally with a shark population, then yeah, just sort of register. And there's certain events as well that they're going to run throughout that week. So yeah, sort of stay tuned. And if you register, I'm sure that you can sort of register to hold your own events and get people sort of around you to go for a dive and take pictures of some sharks. On to my product of the week, which this week is the Apex Black Ice BCD. So the Black Ice, I think, ever since I can't remember when it first came out, but I kind of always remember it as sort of being on the lineup. It's one of those BCDs that it's like a great white shark. It doesn't need to evolve because it simply works and everybody just loves it. It's that kind of crossover wing style BCD. It's still in recreational territory where it's got adjustable shoulder straps and all that kind of stuff, lots of padding, so it's still comfortable even if you're just wearing a rash vest, but it's verging into that sort of almost technical diving where it's getting you used to customizing it a little bit. The waistband, you can actually adjust the overall length of the waistbands, not just with the quick adjust on the buckle in the front, but actually around the back. Because there's not a huge amount of adjustment in the front, you can actually shorten or lengthen each of the waistbands so that, if 1 week you're diving in a dry suit, you can lengthen it so you have plenty of space. But then the next week, if you're going on holiday and you're diving somewhere in the Maldives with a rash vest, then you don't want that huge waistband. You can actually tighten it up. So I think that's very clever. And another thing is those articulating shoulder straps, which help to just migrate some of the weight of your cylinder from your shoulders down to your waist, which is quite clever. It's kind of part of the Rapture system. Because your cylinder is, the cam band is lowered down, it's kind of in the small of your back, it helps to put a lot of the weight of your cylinder on your hips instead of on your shoulders. So out of the water, you can still walk around quite readily because it's not bearing down quite as much on your shoulders. It's a wing style BCD, so all of the inflation is behind you even when it's fully inflated, and it's lowered down as well. So when you're actually diving, you put a little bit of gas into that bladder and it sort of sits either side of your cylinder and a little bit lower, sort of down towards the small of your back, so it holds you in a more horizontal position in the water. Roll down pockets as well, integrated weights which make life a lot easier. You don't have to wear a separate weight belt, but this is one of those BCDs that I'll be very happy diving with this at home here in the UK or diving with it abroad as well. It's that all-rounder, and really with that adjustable waistband, it does make it a game changer to make your life a little bit easier. And one of the final points I wanted to touch on is their grip lock tank band. So instead of a traditional cam band buckle where you get the plastic buckle, you have to thread the strap a certain way back up on itself and then tighten it up and clamp it down, this has a two-part metal buckle. So you get one part which is basically a flattened D-ring and then a hinged buckle on the other side. So that makes swapping over cylinders really easy, especially when you're on a dive boat. Instead of having to lift it up and over the tank valve and then fit it over the next tank valve and shimmy it down so it's in the right position, because it's two parts, you basically put it in front of the cylinder and then just wrap the two parts around the cylinder and then connect them at the back. It's much quicker and much more civilized. But the buckle itself is very civilized in that it's a hinging buckle. It's a metal buckle that clamps itself down, but it has what they call a finger saver device. So when you go to clamp it down, it pauses a few centimeters away from fully closed. So that way, when you've got the right tension on that cam band, you go to shut it, it sort of pauses, gives you a second to make sure that all your fingers and your palms and your arm, everything delicate is out of the way of the buckle, and then you can push it to really clamp it down and secure it. Instead of just one swift motion, it's two, and then it gives you a chance to make sure that it's not pinching any fingers or anything. And then to undo it is just as easy. You lift up the tab and then sort of disconnect it. So yeah, if you're in the market for a tough BCD, wing style BCD that has plenty of customizability and sort of flexibility, especially in that waistband, check out the Apex Black Ice BCD. Next, we move on to this week's question, which is, should you log short dives? And this all came from a Reddit post, and it was a diver. They were just sort of throwing the question out there for people to think about, and it was the hypothetical: what happens if I basically do a bounce dive? Should I log that dive? And there are pros and cons on sort of both sides, and it just sort of got me thinking, so that I could sort of talk about it on the podcast. So officially, and I think this is Paddy, a dive has to be at least 5 meters in depth, which is 15 feet, and at least 20 minutes long to constitute a dive. Basically, I think there was another one that said you have to breathe a certain amount of gas, which was like 1,400 liters or something. But the one that really sticks in my mind is, you have to spend most of your time below 5 meters and be submerged for at least 20 minutes, and that way it classifies as a dive. When you're first starting out and sort of counting your dives, sort of ranking yourself up through the qualifications, I think that's quite important so that you're not just diving every dive in like a swimming pool or something, just sort of check dives, because if I'd have logged every single pool dive that I did whilst I was teaching, I'd probably be in the hundreds of thousands, because I was in and out of the water multiple times every day. But I was never going below 3 meters because I'd need a chisel to get through the tiles. So I don't think those really count as dives. But as far as a bounce dive, for those of you who don't know, is where you go down and then for whatever reason you have to come straight back up. It's like a bounce, but upside down. And I think his example was he had sort of equipment failure or something. I think there was a faulty sensor. I can't remember. But he was asking, or they were asking, should I log this as a dive? And my argument was yes, just because at a certain point when it gets to beyond your like 100 dives, one extra or sort of one bounce dive doesn't really sort of matter to your overall dive count. However, it is important for you to log it, and I'm sure the technician at the hyperbaric chamber would definitely like you to log it, just in case something should happen. And it's more of a training and logging experience, just to make sure that it's all in your logbook. You can always refer back to it. If it is just a bounce dive because of equipment malfunction, then you want to look back on it and say, oh, okay, at this time, at this dive site, these were the conditions when something happened. And then that way, if something similar happens later on, you can refer back to it and say, oh, okay, well, actually, they both happened at this depth or at this water temperature. So maybe it's that's some kind of contributing factor. But I think when you're first starting out, I wouldn't log every single time you get wet as a dive. Do try and sort of limit it to, sort of at least 5 meters, and 5 meters isn't particularly deep, but 20 minutes as well. That's why in a lot of your training dives, you would do either the skills first, get those out of the way, and then just have a swim about for at least 20 minutes to constitute a dive. But then when you're doing fun dives, then you kind of want to sort of make them as long as possible and get some decent experience there to be able to log it. But for bounce dives, sure, the bottom time is only going to be a minute or two, depending on your maximum depth. But I would argue that you should log them, just because after you've reached your 100 dives or whatever, an extra one in your dive count isn't going to be sort of too much of an issue. But should something happen, if you're on a long, like week-long sort of liveaboard trip, and you did a bounce dive for whatever reason, you dropped a weight belt or something, then should something go wrong later on, it is quite important for sort of people to know that, oh look at this, they did a bounce dive, that could sort of have certain effects on their calculations down the road. So I'd say if it's consequential, then I'd probably still log it. Those kind of bounce dives greater than sort of a few meters. But if it's just a 3 meter sort of romp around a reef or something, then I think I'd rather err on the side of caution and just log it, but sort of keep it in your mind that, okay, if you're going onto training agencies and you're really sort of cutting it close with the exact number of dives, I don't think anyone's going to check each and every single one of your dives to say, oh no, you can't start this course yet because you haven't done exactly however many dives. But it's definitely worth sort of keeping a note in your logbook that yes, this was a bounce dive or a short dive or something, but I'd still always log it. And that's it for the podcast this week. Fairly succinct this week. It's still the calm before the storm. I did receive 3 boxes of product samples from various brands, so there is some interesting stuff coming. I promise you, as soon as I can sort of talk about it, I will. But yeah, it's still in like sort of production, as it were. A lot of people are having sort of production issues around the world with everything that's going on. But yeah, there is some interesting scuba diving equipment coming forwards, so stay tuned for that. So remember to follow, subscribe, do all that kind of stuff, and that way you will be the first to know about the latest bits and bobs. And if you're listening to us, then remember to sort of rate and comment wherever you can. Remember to head over to simplyscuba.com, where we sell most of the interesting stuff, and we can ship it to most countries in the world, I believe. And if you have any questions, comments, queries, or even corrections about anything that you've heard, if you pop the hashtag AskMark in your comment, whether it's on YouTube. YouTube is the best place. That's where I tend to look for most of the AskMark questions. Pop it down in there and I will discuss it on the Friday show. Thank you for listening, everybody, and of course, safe diving.